Hello everyone and welcome to the conclusion of the FIDE World Blitz Championship 2025. We have the final game that decides everything. It is Nodirbek Abdusattorov versus Magnus Carlsen. The match is a tie and it all comes down to this game. Or if it's a draw, then they go into further tie breaks. Now, getting all the way to the finals, it was pretty crazy. Magnus Carlsen lost one game where he accidentally threw his queen into Alexander Grishuk, and then he was disqualified, not for hitting Grishuk, but well, you've seen what happened. And then also that game against Haik Martirosyan, where he knocked down all of the pieces. So you've also seen that video. And then he hit the clock before picking them back up. That was also against the rules, so he lost a point there as well. It was all due to poorly managing his time, which is a problem everyone is having here because this is a 3-minute blitz. But still, he managed to qualify for the final four. He had to win for basically all of his games up until the very end, and then he got a 4.5 out of 5 and qualified into the final four. So the final four are Magnus Carlsen, Nodirbek Abdusattorov, Fabiano Caruana, and Arjun Erigaisi. And Nodirbek completely disposed of Arjun Erigaisi. Even though Arjun won the blitz section, the preliminaries, he won a full point ahead of everyone else, and he was in incredible form. He only dropped 1 point to Jordan Van Forest on the first day, and then second day he went completely undefeated against Nodirbek Abdusattorov in the semifinals here of the FIDE World Blitz Championship. He just it just wasn't his match. Nodirbek played brilliantly, won first two games. Third game was a draw, and that was enough to take him down. Didn't even need to go into game four. Magnus Carlsen has defeated Fabiano Caruana in the semifinals. First two games ended in a draw, and then Magnus defeated Fabi in game three. It was a pretty equalish game. Then Magnus just won, and in game four, Fabi had to win, and then Magnus just completely obliterated him, sacrificed a piece, went for the attack, and that was it with Fabi. And now we have the final match. The first game was won by Nodirbek. It was a Magnus blundered. He played a terrible blunder in the end game. Nodirbek capitalized on that. Then Magnus in the second game went into an equal end game, and it seemed as if Nodirbek was already bored playing it. But then Magnus all of a sudden snatched a pawn. Nodirbek was down a pawn, and Magnus was able to win that end game. Game three, Magnus was sort of pushing, but then Nodirbek found a very nice sacrifice that allowed him a perpetual check, which Magnus had to accept. Otherwise, it just maybe he would even be worse. And that brings us to this point. This is game four. Let's check it out. Nodirbek has the white pieces, so he is in a better position. But yeah, he has to win. Otherwise, we go into further tiebreak. So pawn to e4 by Nodirbek, pawn to e5. Knight f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5. Nodirbek goes for the Ruy Lopez. We have pawn to a6, the Morphy's defense, bishop to a4, and knight to f6. We have pawn to d3 and pawn to b5. Okay, bishop to b3 and bishop to b7, bishop to e7. Anderssen's variation of the Ruy Lopez. As I always say, those of you who have seen my Morphy saga know why it's called the Anderssen variation. We have pawn to a4, and now pawn to b4, the main move in the position. Magnus goes for rook to b8. We have a trade on b5, captures, and knight to c3. We have castles, and pawn to d6. Again, nothing new being played here. This is all very standard stuff of the Ruy Lopez. h3, h6, bishop to e3. You can see by the situation on the clocks that they're just instantly making moves, as you don't want to spend time for nothing in this situation of the tournament. So rook e8 and knight to e2. There is a game, queen d2. Anish Giri played it against Vladislav Artemiev in Shenzhen Logang tournament last year, and Anish won that game. But here Magnus deviates, or rather Nodirbek deviates from that, plays knight to e2, and it is now as of move 13 that we have a completely new game, and this is where our game starts. Okay, so bishop to f8 from Magnus, again, very standard stuff. Putting the bishop here will help out with the defense if this knight ever comes to f5. Could be very nasty here. Knight to g3 and bishop to e6, countering Nodirbek's strong bishop on b3. We have bishop captures on e6, rook cap. You could also capture with the f-pawn, but if ruining your pawn structure doesn't really do anything, there's no reason to do it. c3, and Magnus strikes with pawn to d5. We have queen to c2, pawn to b4, creating some weaknesses on the queen side, and rook f to d1. We have queen to c8 and queen to a4 now, putting pressure on the knight, but also just preparing to lift the queen and the rook of that A file. So B captures on C3, B captures and knight to E7. We have queen to A7 by Nodirbek, and now knight to G6. Magnus not convinced that this is anything spectacular. We have rook D to B1, and we have a trade of rooks. Rook captures, D captures on E4, D captures on E4, and Magnus plays rook to C6. He goes after the C3 pawn, and you'd probably think that, okay, now is the time to defend it. Something like queen A5, you defend the pawn. But no, Nodirbek goes to rook to B8. He goes for the attack. He says Magnus's back rank is also a little bit weak. Queen to E6, and now, again, not defending the pawn, but rather queen to A8, putting pressure on that bishop on F8, although it's unclear what he's trying to do as the bishop is defended. But it's there's more than meets the eye here. Now, rook captures on C3. Magnus could also try something like rook A6, go after the queen, but there's always queen B7, so it's nothing spectacular. And you don't have rook b6 then because there's a bishop on e3. So rook captures on c3, Magnus grabs the pawn, and knight to f5. And here the only move for Magnus is knight to d7. If he doesn't play it, he will just lose the game terribly. So he does it. Knight d7. It also comes with tempo, attacking the rook, rook to e8, and now queen to c6, offering a queen trade. And you don't have to do it, but Nodirbek does it. A queen captures, we have rook captures on c6, and pawn to h4. Now, Nodirbek will win back the pawn. That's not really questionable. But it's still a very interesting and difficult position to play. So rook to e6, offering a trade of rooks. We have rook to c8, going after the c7 pawn, and really there's no good way to defend it. Magnus tries to defend it via tactic. He goes knight f6, attacks the pawn on e4, knight to d2, and now knight to e7. Giving up the pawn, rook captures on c7, and the knight captures on f5. We have e captures and rook back to e8. So Nodirbek equalized in material, but he is left with a doubled f pawn. And here already the game again becomes interesting. Rook to c6 from Nodirbek, we have pawn to h5 from Magnus, and now bishop to g5, attacking the knight. Magnus just goes knight d5, and here Nodirbek plays knight to e4. We have pawn to f6, kicking away the bishop, and here Nodirbek plays bishop to d2. And bishop to d2 is not the best way to play. You should play bishop to e3. And the reason for that is that after bishop to e3, for example, you go knight e7, you attack the pawn and the rook, you can play rook e6. And now the rook here is hanging. And only after the rook moves, then you play knight g3 and you defend your f5 pawn. And then everything is fine. However, bishop to d2 was played by Nodirbek, and now Magnus plays knight to e7. He attacks the rook, and Nodirbek goes rook to a6. The problem with this exact same line is that now after rook to e6, you can attack the bishop, which would not be possible if the bishop was on e3. You go rook to d8, and now the problem is, okay, you can play bishop to b4 because the same line, if you move the knight to defend the pawn, then the bishop on d2 is undefended. You can play bishop to b4, and then still you're going to be down a pawn. Knight captures on f5, but at least you will get the bishops off the board, and maybe it's a bit more manageable. Knight versus knight. Yes, it is 4 versus 3, but it's on the same side of the board. So maybe more manageable than what Nodirbek chooses. He plays rook to a6, and now Magnus wins the pawn, but the bishops are to remain on the board. We have g3, king to f7, king to g2, and king to g6. Both of them activated their kings. We have rook to a4 and rook to c8. We have rook to a2, and now knight to d4. We have bishop to e3 and knight to f5. Okay, trying to trade knight for bishop. So, of course, Nodirbek declines. We have knight to d6, offering a trade of knights and a trade. Captures, captures. We have bishop back to e3, and Nodirbek says, all right, you're up a pawn. Try and beat me. Objectively, this is equal, but you can see 11 seconds on the clock versus 6 seconds on the clock. Only the side with the pawn is the side pushing here, which is the case in classical, although in classical, you're never winning this. You know, unless it's that one example where you are. But okay, king to f5, we have rook a7, pawn to g6, as the pawn on g7 was hanging. We have rook back to e2, and rook to c4. We have rook to d2 going after the bishop, bishop to b4 attacking the rook, and rook to a2. followed by bishop to c3. So now it's up to Magnus. He can either try for here it's not the 50 move rule, here is the 75 move rule, to try and make something out of it, because if not, then they're going into tiebreak. So he has nothing to lose. He should push as much as he can. Rook to c2, we have king to e4, rook to a2, Nodirbek just repeating moves back and forth, bishop to d4. We have bishop to h6, of course avoiding the trade, king d3, rook to a3 check, and rook to c3. Rooks you cannot trade because, of course, you know how to play the endgame. Bishops of the same color, you're up a pawn, you're winning that game. But there are situations where you actually can, and Nodirbek says this is one of them. He plays rook captures on c3, king captures on c3, and now bishop to g7. And this, believe it or not, is still a draw, but if played, well, to perfection. We have pawn to e4 by Magnus, defending the pawn, king to f1, and king to d3. We have bishop to h6 and bishop to e5, and this is what I mean by it's a draw, but you have to play it perfectly. The only move that does not lose for Nodirbek is bishop to g7. Nodirbek, however, plays bishop to c1. He's trying to bait Magnus to play pawn to f5, and if he plays pawn to f5, he's just going to return back bishop to g5. And now you have this sort of a barrier on the dark squares, and there's no way to push for anything. But Magnus doesn't fall for it. After bishop to c1, Magnus plays pawn to e3, and now he's breaking through regardless of what Nodirbek plays. If you capture them, bishop captures on g3, and then you pick up on h4, or if bishop captures, then bishop captures on g3. This is what happened in the game. Now, if you trade, then it's completely winning for black. Of course, 3 versus 2 is winning. So bishop to g5 was played. Nodirbek played it basically with 1 second on the clock. There's no move you can play, so it doesn't matter what you play. He just played it. Maybe it works. You never know. Magnus played f captures on g5, and he was in this position on move 62 that Nodirbek Abdusattorov resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So he took the lead in the match, won the first game. Magnus retaliated in the second one. Third game, very nice draw by Nodirbek, I would say. And then in game 4, Magnus just outplaying him completely in the end game. And for those of you who are wondering, once you trade down into this endgame, this is completely winning. There's no way to stop black from winning that pawn. You're going to go king g2, king to f4, king h3, and now you just oppose the white king, force him back, play king g4, win the pawn, then push the pawns, and of course, completely winning. So yeah, 62 moves to take down Nodirbek, and I mean, absolutely amazing turn of events. And I've seen some of you saying that, okay, it's not fair, Arjun won the preliminaries, he should be the World Blitz champion. But okay, I mean, rules are rules. It was the preliminaries, and then they go into knockouts, and then okay, Arjun had his chance, but it just wasn't his day against Nodirbek. And unfortunately for, you know, anyone who is not a Magnus fan, the more game rule always favors the stronger player. If you remember what we were discussing when Bobby Fischer declined to play the US Chess Championship, he wanted for it to be a double round robin, or a triple round robin, or a quadruple round robin, just not a single round robin, because he said it's not impossible for me to lose one game, and someone could have the tournament of their life, and then, you know, I'm just not going to win. If we make it a double round robin or a triple or a quadruple round robin, then chances are, even if, you know, someone has like a brilliant game or I mess up, I'm still going to be able to catch up. And that's the same with Magnus. You know, if you make it more games, if it was if the world championship was let's say a series of playing 100 games, let's say this exact same tournament, only we make it a, you know, versus you play more games against everyone, then it is almost certain that that Magnus would always win, because he's the strongest, and the more chances you give him, he would, of course, take advantage of them. But yeah, I mean, it's how it is. Magnus just wins everything he touches. There's nothing he hasn't won. So yeah, here we are once again. Magnus, this is his 20th title altogether. This is his 4th double title, because he's now also the 2025 World Rapid and Blitz champion. Classical, no, because he's not playing classical. So yeah, really amazing stuff. And yeah, if you're a Magnus fan, life is good. If you're anyone else's fan, then I guess you guys are a little bit sad. But at the end of the day, it is always chess that wins. And for chess, it is good that the Magnus is having a good day. Because I think even sports do better when there's that one person that's just a little bit better than everyone else. He just pushes the everything in the right direction. He popularizes it, and then even more people get interested. Sort of like a hero of the sport or of the game. But yeah, that's what happened. Big congratulations to Magnus Carlsen. To everyone else, I mean, Fabi had an amazing tournament. Nodirbek had Arjun. I mean, just obliterated everyone in preliminaries. What are you going to do? So yeah, I really hope you enjoyed it. I don't know if I will be making any videos tomorrow. If not, have a great new year, everyone, and see you in the next one. I would like to thank Timothy Rosen, Jeffrey Johnson, John Tardif, Kim Dolman, and William Fuller for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. And if you still haven't, first link in the description below, download Lotus Chess and see why it is the best app to improve your chess. See you soon.